Welcome back to Andersen Acres. We're inside again today, and today we're going to talk about yet another chicken breed. Today we're going to talk about a breed that goes by two names, depending on where you're from, and depending on what you decide to call them, because there are two actual names. We're talking about the Cornish, which is also called the Indian game bird. Now, to be very clear, these are not game birds. They're not really game birds. That's just what they're called. They're actually table birds or meat birds. So they're not game birds. Game birds is something entirely different. That's just what they originally were called. So the oldest name is actually the Indian game bird. And it's difficult to pin down their exact origin because people didn't keep track, and this breed has been around for a very long time. Now, it's definitely descended from the Asiatic fighting birds that were in Asia, and it may have been present in Europe for over 1,000 years. How long? We don't really know. This breed is so old and has been around for so long, and people do not keep track of chickens because they're chickens. So there's really no way to know. There's a lot of debate surrounding the origin of this breed. It's really a pointless debate. I don't think we're ever going to know for sure. And for sure, there was a ton of outcrossing happening over the years, over those centuries where this bird is just there in Europe doing a thing and being eaten, basically. Because they are a meat bird. Let's be very clear. This is a meat bird, and it was used as a fighting bird. It is not an egg-laying breed, so do not go out and get Cornish because you want eggs. It's not going to work. Don't do that. We'll talk about that in a minute. But they started as a fighting breed and evolved. Sorry about the noise. That's Gemini. Gemini! Stop it. Anyway, so they were originally a fighting bird, and then they kind of evolved into a meat and table bird, which is the only reason, sorry for Gemini, but the only reason this breed still exists is because it was able to evolve into a meat bird. If it had stayed just a fighting bird, it would be extinct now. So, let's get to the UK, where they were originally, because this breed is traditionally said to come from Cornwall, England. That's why we call them Cornish now. But originally they were called the Indian game bird. So in the UK, they were originally fighting birds. And like I said, they were called Indian game, the Indian game bird. Now, they were fighting birds almost exclusively for a long time. They had a broad breast, though, and they were a powerful bird, and they weren't long-lived. They didn't have to be. They were a fighting bird. So when the UK banned the fighting cocks in 1849, the breed might have died out if it wasn't for its usefulness as a table bird, a meat bird. So they didn't die only because of that. Because traditionally, if you outlaw something, the breed you use to do that thing dies out. But they didn't because they had another purpose. They were then able to be used as a meat bird because of that broad breast, that broad, powerful breast. It allowed for a greater proportion of white meat, which is what people really enjoy. So they were an ideal table bird. In fact, most commercial broiler birds are descended from the original Indian game birds. Now, often they were outcrossed with Dorkings or with the white rock hens or something like that, but the commercial UK broiler birds that you buy in the grocery store are all descended from the Indian game bird, just because they were such a good table bird. They came to the U.S. around 1875, 1877. The exact date is a little, we're not really sure. And they were imported and then called Cornish because Indian game bird made it ignore Gemini. Anyway, doesn't matter. Gemini. Seriously. Whatever. Ignore Gemini. Just totally ignore Gemini. But, so when they were brought to the U.S., instead of being called Geminis, they're not Gemini, sorry. But instead of being called Indian game birds, they were called Cornish. One, it's because the word Indian game bird, that phrase kind of conjured up the idea of cockfighting, and they wanted people to know that this was a table bird, a bird that was going to make a good meat bird, not a bird that was only good for fighting. So they called them the Cornish. There is a smaller white Cornish, It's not related to this Cornish. How do birds end up with multiple names like that? Back when they were naming birds, not everyone was communicating because we didn't have the internet or even telephones. So you didn't really have someone to go, no, we're already using that name for another breed. So sometimes you end up with two breeds that have a similar or even the same name, or sometimes you have one breed of chicken called by multiple names. And that's usually originating from a time when people just didn't communicate readily, and no one really kept track because they're chickens. So the smaller white Cornish is not related to the larger meat utility Cornish that is also the Indian game bird. And they come from England, not India. It's confusing. Just accept it. It's just not worth worrying about. So, again, like I said, they are not really game birds. They are table birds. They are designed for meat. They have these really bright yellow feet. If they're on a grass diet, if your Cornish are not on an appropriate grass diet, then their feet are not necessarily going to be that bright orange. But that bright orange is kind of traditional for Cornish breeds. They do tend to be very heavy very quickly. Okay, they're prone to being quite overweight, so they need an exercise regimen, controlled diet, very little corn and very little treats in order to maintain a lower body fat than they would normally, because they can get very, very fat very, very fast. Okay, they can get very fat. And when they get really overweight, that decreases the fertility and it lowers their egg laying, the egg production. And nobody wants that because they already don't lay very many eggs. They literally only lay 60 to 90 eggs per year per hen, which is nowhere near what even something like silkies lay. Silkies don't lay much, and they lay more than that. So when you have Cornish, you're not eating the eggs, you're hatching the eggs, because you definitely want the babies, right, to grow up and be meat birds. So these are not an egg-laying breed. They are not a breed that anyone would recommend you get in order to have eggs. So these are strictly a meat bird. Only get these if you are interested in having a meat bird, because they are not good layers, and I would never recommend them to anyone who's looking for a layer. But that is about it for us today. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about the Cornish, also called the Indian game hen. So we will come back next time and talk about yet another breed. But for now, we'll see you tomorrow.